Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, welcome back to the second day of the review session. Oh, we have that echo again. No, I don't think so. This time we have the technical problem solved. I hope. So we are expecting Venerable Gache in 1 minute. So I'm so sorry that I couldn't really introduce him yesterday, but we are so very happy to have Venerable Gache leading the review sessions because he's really extremely busy down in Sara Monastery where he studies. And he's just such an amazing teacher and so skilled and well studied. 16 years in the Geshe program at Sara Monastery. So we are very, very happy. And Venerable Gache probably also going to say in a minute that tomorrow, the weekend, all the sessions will be dedicated to chapter 9. Yes, because His Holiness read today through the whole book, and tomorrow will be the chenresig initiation, but we will dedicate the whole 2 days for chapter 9, so we can really go into emptiness in that way. Yeah, I'm sure he will make an announcement as well. So there he is.
Hello.
Hello, Venerable Gache.
Okay, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Okay. Let's see.
How's your connection at
This
Sara?
is a little better.
Yes.
The internet connection. Yeah,
Yes.
no problems here.
Good.
The power is not good, so the computer has to, the battery has to last, but the internet connection is good here. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Venerable Gache. I talked already a little bit, so I give the microphone straight to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah. Well, yes, I heard the tail end of what Venerable Kunpan was saying, so that's right. We were a little surprised by the teaching this morning. Actually, I didn't see it this morning. We had debate this morning, so I watched it after lunch, and it turned out to be 3 hours. I thought I would watch it before doing the session, but I had to watch it in fast mode to get through it in time. But anyway, it was mainly a oral transmission of the entire text. So I will go through. My main point today will be I said I had it in fast forward, and then when I noticed His Holiness was giving some commentary, then I would slow it down and listen to that, and put that. I will talk about the verses that he specifically commented on, and let's see how much time that takes, and then if we might have some questions afterwards, and then tomorrow and the next day, because I prepared a presentation about chapter 9, we'll just do that so we can consider it a course on chapter 9 that's either a supplement to His Holiness teaching, or we can see it as independent, however you like. But in any case, I expect most of you, if you're here today, would have attended the teachings or watched the teachings, but the next couple of days, it's open to anybody, whether or not you've attended the teachings, because it's not necessarily tied to that. As His Holiness mentioned today, chapter 9 is the hardest chapter. He said, it's good if you can all read this text. Anyone can understand it except chapter 9. So we'll have to see if we can go through that one together and make it clear. Yeah, there will be recordings, somebody's asked. So yes, I expect it will be recorded if people aren't able to attend the weekend session also. So again, as yesterday, I like to start, if we can just sit quietly for a couple of minutes, and then we can start with the review. Okay. So a couple loose ends from yesterday. I'd mentioned a few books that I said I would try to locate to show you all. His Holiness mentioned those books yesterday about the Indian Classic series. So this is the book here. This is volume 1, as you can see, Science and Philosophy, Indian Buddhist Classics. So volume 1, the physical world, and volume 2 is the mind, I believe. So there's 7 volumes, but only 2 so far in English. I think the third one is in the works. This is Wisdom Publications. I think there might also be an Indian edition, I'd say. But in any case, yeah, you can search for those. And then secondly, I mentioned His Holiness had talked about at the beginning of the talk yesterday, Shantarakshita's text on logic and epistemology. So this was translated. It was translated from Sanskrit, looks like, into English in 1938. So I cannot testify as to the accuracy of it because I haven't read it. As I mentioned, we studied this during the Ladakh class, so I haven't reached that point yet. At some point, if I reach there and I'm studying the text, I will check it against the translation and see how it is. But if anybody happens to be interested, as I mentioned it, here is this book, the Tattva Samgraha of Shantarakshita, translated by, what's it, Bhaganatha Jha, in 1938, published by Motilal Banasidas, Indian publisher. This is the first volume, so there's 2 volumes, quite long. It includes the commentary by Kamala Shila also. So if any of you are very diligent and interested in that kind of thing, that's an opportunity for that. And also there was one question at the end of yesterday I mentioned I would answer at the beginning of this session. Somebody had their hand up. Would you like to ask the question now? Okay, well, if not, yeah, you can ask later in the session if you like, or you can send it separately. But anyway, we'll start with the review here. So His Holiness was saying at the very beginning, today is a holiday apparently of Pelton Hummel, and hardly to Pelton Hummel until he was doing the extensive Serkim this morning. As you might know, His Holiness has a special connection with Pelton Hummel. There's all of the Dalai Lamas have had that connection. And then, oh yeah, then he said yesterday he did the general presentation of the text, so now he'll go right to the text, as he did. And then he said, he quoted a verse that's talking about the importance of the human life, so this supreme basis of the human form that we have found in this time. So it's very important to make use of it. He was saying that the time of the death is certain, time of death is uncertain. So very important to take the essence of the human life. And he was saying that Tibetans, they accumulate many Mani mantras. They have a special connection with Avalokiteshvara, with Buddhism in general. And then His Holiness was just saying that the main Dharma refuge is the one we generate in our continuum. This is the resultant refuge we talk about, not something external to ourselves, but the one we generate in our continuum, meaning the truth of the path and the truth of cessation. And then he was mentioning in the mantra from the Heart Sutra, Tayotam Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Soha, which represents the stages of the path. You might know that this refers to Gate as or go is referring to this path of accumulation, and the second Gate to the path of accumulation. Path of we say in English, preparation. So accumulation, then preparation. Then the third one is so Gate Gate Paragate, so go beyond, is referring to the path of seeing, and then Parazam Gate, go completely beyond, is the path of meditation, and then Bodhisattva is referring to enlightenment. His Holiness, it covers this point quite extensively in his book, The Essence of the Heart Sutra, if you'd like to read about that. So His Holiness was saying that for us, our mikyu, meaning our the thing that we're striving for, that we're aiming for, should be complete Buddhahood. And then having such a mind makes us happy, makes the mind happy and the body healthy. And His Holiness, again, like yesterday was saying, if you have bodhicitta, it benefits you, it benefits others, it benefits in the short term, it benefits in the long run. And he said that the best book for understanding bodhicitta is this book, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. And he was mentioning that the Tibetan people, they also have a uncommonly strong practice of bodhicitta. So he says the best in the morning to think, I will practice in this way. So then His Holiness went on to chapter 2 of the text. We finished chapter 1 yesterday. So what I'll do, I have the text here. I can do screen share, I think, and then when I'll go to the verses that His Holiness. Oh, I need to load it, I think. That His Holiness specifically commented on. Hold on a minute. Okay, can you all see that now? It should be displayed, right? So we are chapter 2. This is bachelor's translation I was able to get on the internet for free, PDF. Disclosure or evil, really the confession of sin would be the exact translation. The point is, that once one has recognized the benefits, as the first chapter is about the benefits of bodhicitta, we need to confess negativities and accumulate merit by making offerings. So that's what is done in the second chapter. So you see in the first verse, in order to seize that precious mind, meaning in order to take the Bodhisattva vow, now I offer to the Tathagatas and so forth. So it's preparing for chapter 3 when we take the Bodhisattva vows. So His Holiness, he commented on verse 8 here. Eternally shall I offer all my bodies to the conquerors and their sons. Please accept me, you supreme heroes. Respectfully, I shall be your subject. We emphasize the point about subject, that we consider ourselves the subject to it, the subject of the king, or the subject of the Buddhas. And so we follow their advice and practice their teachings and try to actualize their state. After that, verse 29, he commented on. Overwhelmed by the deceptions of ignorance, I rejoiced in what was done. So this is now confessing one's past negativity. So in the past, I was overwhelmed by ignorance, and I actually rejoiced in bad actions that I did or that others did. But now, seeing these as mistakes, I declare from my heart, I declare them to the Buddhas. So this is again part of a fairly long section here on confessing one's past negative actions. And His Holiness was saying that this is similar to in Umadajukpa, the Madhyamakavatara. So he quoted a verse from here. Okay. Actually, no, I see. I was trying to remember the number of the verse in Tibetan, and I realized I remember the page number. So it's not that number, but I'll find it quickly. Let's see. Yeah, so here it is. Verse 120 is the correct verse. Verse 120. Oh, So it looks like I've lost you all.
I think we lost Venerable Gache, but here he is back.
Okay, hello again. Sorry about that. So it seems to me that this computer that I'm using, which was donated to me by somebody just recently, it crashes. Did the same thing yesterday when I'm doing the screen share. So this is good to know for this weekend. So I will use our house computer instead, starting tomorrow. Make sure that doesn't crash during the weekend. But let's see if we can get through this this verse again. If it crashes again, then I'll just explain it next time without showing the verse. Hold on. Okay. So yeah, it's verse 120 of chapter 6 of Chandrakirti's text. So His Holiness was pointing out. He said, "I have all these actions I've done overwhelmed by ignorance." So he was pointing out that when we do negative actions, it comes from ignorance. It doesn't come from some kind of inherent intention that we're evil people. It just comes from not understanding. So then he was quoting this verse from Chandrakirti, seeing with their wisdom that all afflictions are and all faults stem from the identity view, grasping at the perishable collection. So it's saying that
I think we lost him again. 1 second. I'm sure he will be back in a second. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Venerable Gache, please unmute yourself. We can't hear you. You still seem muted.
okay, now can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. So yeah, let's say today we won't do the screen sharing because it doesn't seem to be working well on this computer, but it's not a big problem. There's not so many verses today, but tomorrow we can start with the screen sharing for the class, and I will use a different computer for that reason. So in any case, yeah, it is verse 120 of Chandrakirti's text, chapter 6, verse 120. The point is that all negativities and faults arise from self-grasping, the view that conceives an inherent self of person. And so that is, His Holiness is relating that to the verse 29 of Shantideva in chapter 2, when he's saying that all these actions have been out of ignorance. He's saying that this is similar to Chandrakirti explaining that all actions, all negativity in the world, it comes from misunderstanding, misapprehending the nature of the self. And then His Holiness also quoted from Dharmakirti's text, this similar idea. Chapter 2 was it verse, if anyone has the translation by Geshe Dorje Damdo. So actually I brought this so I can do a kind of screen share here, just by holding it up here. Let's see. Verse 220 of chapter 2. Actually, sorry, verse 219. You'll see here. This is a, how do you say, low-tech screen share. So the very last, what does it say here? Of course, I can't read it very well. Seeing the self will lead to seeing others, right? So that we have the idea of me. This is a wrong conception that there's this inherent I. Then it leads to seeing that there's others as well, and then bifurcating self and others leads to attachment and aversion. Then there's then the sense of myself and others. There's a split. There's me and other people, or we might have my family and the people who are outside of my family, or my friends and my non-friends. So we have these wrong conceptions. So then it's associated with these, with attachment and aversion, leads to all faults. And then, Geshe Dorje Damdo is put in brackets here, killing and so forth. The point being that Dharmakirti is saying all faults in the world ultimately come from this. Everything comes from having this wrong conception of self. And then as a result of that, then we have all kinds of wrong conceptions, and we just split the world into self and other and all kinds of other wrong views, and that leads to all of the different problems that we have. And so then His Holiness, then he quoted from, so now I'll just be reading the text. I won't be able to, again, screen share the Shantideva's text. Maybe it's better not to do so. But if you happen to have it with you, you can follow. So this is verse 40 of chapter 2. So when I'm sitting or lying on my deathbed, then all of my relatives surround me. So the feeling of separating from this body, I alone will experience. So His Holiness was pointing out that nobody else can help you at the time of death. It's up to you what practice you've done in this life that will prepare you for that time. Then he continued to read through, did not read it too. So chapter 3 is the taking up the mind of awakening of bodhicitta. So the point here is that after in chapter 2, having confessed one's negativity, now actually taking up the awakening mind. So His Holiness often suggests reciting this chapter. It's it's similar to taking the Bodhisattva vow. Actually, I think oftentimes when he gives the Bodhisattva vow, he will do so by reciting this chapter, or having people recite this chapter. So first he went to verse 16 of chapter 3. So may anyone who looks at me with a mind of anger, may it always be the cause to achieve all of their purposes. The point is that we always pray for everybody, including those who harm us. We don't have any how do you say, this dividing between friends and enemies, any partiality between people who harm us and the people who help us. We're working to benefit both of them. And he's mentioned, he always recites verse 21. So so like the great elements and the earth and so forth, and the sky being permanent, in the same way, may I always be a source of wish-fulfilling source for all beings. That I always fulfill their wishes. So this is similar also, some of you might know the verses from the precious garland that His Holiness very frequently recites. Saranjuna Medamong and Nagobejin Chindu. Dr. Simpson Tamjiki Rangar Game Chitar, which is in the chapter 5, near the end of chapter 5 of the Precious Garland, and he says, like the earth, water, wind, firewood, and so forth, then may I always be a source of happiness for all sentient beings. I'm laughing when I say firewood because you might know a few years ago, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he also had been asking people to recite this during the first opening month of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were at Maratika, and Venerable Namjung and I were both laughing when we recited it because it seemed like a very odd translation. It was something like earth, water, wind, and monastery firewood. So we didn't know how that fit in. But it seems the translation, whoever translated it, is monastery firewood because it says Gompa Jing. Gonpa is monastery, but Gompa also means wilderness. So it would seem that it means like a wild wood in the forest, which makes more sense because the point here is we're offering things that are unowned. If you offer monastery firewood, it would become stealing because you're taking it from the monastery. So Rinpoche, we pointed that point out, and Rinpoche said, yeah, maybe it's good that we change that. But actually, those few verses from the Precious Garland, it said, are considered to be the source for mind training, sort of the beginning of the mind training tradition in India. So in some sense, this text by Shantideva is an expansion of that part of the Precious Garland. So it's a similar idea here. Comparing oneself to all of the elements may always fulfill being witches in that way. And then verses 23, 24, he says every morning he recites. So actually, some of you might know, if you recite the 6-session Guru Yoga, these two verses are in that almost exactly. There's very slightly difference in wording in the first line, just to fit it into the rhythm of the 6-session Guru Yoga. And there are two lines added extra at the beginning. So it's the 4th verse of the 6-session Guru Yoga. What is Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, please pay attention to me. Just as the previous Buddhas have developed the mind of awakening, may I too develop the mind of awakening and train the Bodhisattva deeds. This is verse 20, 23, 24 of this chapter. So actually, if you know the 6-session Guru Yoga, quite a few of the verses are taken from this chapter. His Holiness Ven also, these verses are considered taking the engaging Bodhisattva vows. So as opposed to taking the vows of aspiring Bodhicitta, when we say, may I achieve enlightenment, now it's saying, I will engage in the Bodhisattva deeds in order to do so. So again, if you know the 6-session Guru Yoga, that verse 3 is the aspiring, and verse 4 is the engaging vows. So here in Shantideva's text, it's similar that he starts out with the engaging mind, which I'd have to think about it for a while. So actually, don't have me say it right now, but because I'm not sure which verse exactly we would identify as considered to the engaging mind, but so obviously the aspiring mind. But certainly these two verses are regarding the Bodhisattva deeds, the engaging mind, because Lapa, the training. So I will also engage in the trainings. And then immediately after that, His Holiness mentioned, and that they were rejoicing on what one has done by doing so. So those verses are also in the 6-session Guru Yoga. There's verse 25 is not, but then 26 and 27, which His Holiness quoted, so today my life has fruit, my human existence is well obtained, and I've been born in the family of the Buddhas. I've become a son or child of the Buddhas. So again, it's just rejoice in what we've done. When we recite these, to feel some sense of joy. I've done, I feel good about what I'm doing. How wonderful it is to be able to do this. And His Holiness said it's important to do this also so that in this and other lives, we will not be separate from these trainings, that we will create the imprint to continue on with them. Some of you might know it's considered that the Bodhisattva vow is lasts over multiple lifetimes. So the Pratimoksha vow only lasts until one dies. So as soon as you die, then you lose your vows. You're no longer a monk or a nun. But if you take the Bodhisattva vow, then that continues. So it should continue. If it's not generated, it will continue into the next life. And then ideally, one would meet with teachers who would then reawaken that same. So then when you're taking it in the next life, it's not that you're taking it for the first time. It's the first time in that life, but you're just reawakening what was continuing from before. So then he mentioned verse 28. So just as a beggar finds rubbish in a heap of rubbish, finds a jewel, so likewise this mind of bodhicitta has arisen in me. Oh, actually, no, sorry. I have here verse 28. It was not until chapter 4, verse 28. So he skipped quite a bit, just reading through it. And then chapter 4. So now we've taken the Bodhisattva vow. And then chapter 4 is conscientiousness. So relying on conscientiousness. It might be translated differently in English, but the word Bagyo in Tibetan, really what Bagyo means is being careful. Every action. So always being aware of what we're doing and making sure that it accords with what we're trying to achieve. So this chapter starts with that when a bodhisattva has taken this vow, then it's without being distracted to always follow the training. And it's not enough just to take the vow and then leave it at that. You have to always be diligent to continue with the trainings. So he quoted verse 28 of this chapter. Oh, he was saying, this is the disadvantages of afflictions. So this verse 28 and going on from there. So all of the enemies, the hatred and desire and so forth, they have no legs and arms and they have no courage, yet somehow they've enslaved me. So it's thinking about the situation that we're under the control of karma and affliction. They're mainly afflictions in this case. And then verse 33. So if we treat our enemy nicely, then he'll become our friend. And this is what happens in the world. We can improve the relationship with somebody by treating them well. But it says if I treat them the afflictions nicely, they'll only turn around and harm me. This is very different than the normal enemy. So His Holiness said, this enemy never becomes your friend. Yeah, that's the point of this verse here, that we have to, I was thinking actually in the context of this, that some of you might know, this is a saying of the Buddha that's quite important, because sometimes there's a stereotype of Buddhism that it's a sort of a quietist or a pacifist religion, that we should just let things be and let things, whatever happens is okay. No need to worry too much about anything. No need to be too ambitious about anything. But the Buddha was very clear that when the Buddha talked about the importance of contentment, contentment means being satisfied with this external situation. That to a certain extent, of course, we should do something to make sure we have proper food and medical care. But beyond that, to get too obsessed about wanting more and more, bigger house and a bigger car and more money and all of these things, that's not really so helpful in the long run. So this is why Buddhism, the Buddha's teaching is to practice contentment in that regard. But it's a mistake that the Buddha was very clear not to be content with your state of mind, not to think, oh, I have too much anger and too much attachment, but that's just how it is. And I might as well just get used to it and accept myself as I am. Actually, the Buddha said quite the opposite, that can change. And as long as you feel that that's an okay situation, then it won't change. So this is exactly what Shantideva is saying here in verse 29 of this chapter, when he says, they abide in my mind and do as they please to harm me. So this is not a cause for patience. This is a cause for anger. So the point is that we don't really want to be angry in the sense of getting misjudging the situation, but it's actually a cause to feel agitation and feel that I really need to do something about the situation. It's not okay as it is. Of course, if we couldn't do anything about it, as Shantideva says, then it's worthless to worry about it. But in this case, we can do something about it. So it's also pointless not to do anything about it, and we can. So then he mentioned verse 45. He said it's the same point. An ordinary enemy, when I expel him from this realm, this area, then he will then build up his forces and come back to harm me. So this is the opposite. We were comparing the ordinary enemy to the affliction, saying if we befriend the ordinary enemy, they'll become our friend, whereas the afflictions won't. But in the opposite case, if we expel our ordinary enemy, then he'll just come back to harm us. Or even we could say if we kill him, it still is very clear that killing your enemy doesn't end the situation, because then his family or his friends will come back to get you. But with the afflictions, it's not that way. That they will, once destroyed, they will not come back. This is something unique, that it's something that we can cut the continuum completely, and then the afflictions will not arise again. So then His Holiness moved on to chapter 5. Chapter 5 is relying or regarding, which is Shejin. Shejin is, I think, some prayojana in Sanskrit. It's very hard to translate into English. So sometimes it's translated as awareness or introspection. I think introspection is the best translation, because the idea is that it means essentially being aware of what's happening in your mind. So introspection, not in the sense of like that you sit down for an hour and trying to focus inward, but that at all times there's some part of the mind, or actually a good translation that I think Thupten Jinpa uses, meta-awareness. This is kind of the modern psychological idea they have, that meta-awareness means that although your mind is whatever it's doing, there's some part of your mind that's aware of what the other part of your mind is doing. So that's very, very important for controlling the mind, because it says here at the beginning of the chapter, if you wish to guard the trainings, you need to guard your mind. If we don't know what's happening in our minds, then we won't really be able to practice, to behave properly, because our minds will always be controlling us. So as I've said before, I think it's sometimes we might think if we have anger in the mind that we need to immediately block that out. But the most important thing, first of all, is to be aware of it. If we're afraid of our own anger and we don't allow it, allow ourselves to experience it, then that actually can be an obstacle to this introspection. That we don't really acknowledge that there's that experience in the mind. But if we can acknowledge it, then we can overcome it, or apply an antidote to it. So it starts with this introspection. So this is why Shantideva, he devotes an entire chapter to that, comparing the mind to the wild elephant. So introspection goes hand in hand with mindfulness. So he talks about mindfulness here too. And mindfulness also is a bit difficult to translate into English. So actually, don't want to get too much off the topic, but it's a very important point that mindfulness was a term that was used. It was originally used by the British scholar T.W. Rhys David, who translated the Pali Canon in about 1900. And he borrowed this from the Christian tradition, because he was a Christian in England. And he, not at least in 19th century Christianity in Britain, then there was a popular saying that be mindful of the needs of others. So always keep in mind what others need. What that's not just, don't just think about yourself, always be mindful of those other people and what they want. So the term smriti or sati would have been in Pali, or trempa in Tibetan. All of these terms just mean memory. So it just means remembering. But he thought that mindfulness was a good translation because it's a specific kind of memory. It's not like training in memory in the sense of being able to memorize lots of text. That's something that in Buddhism is a practice, but that's a little different from what's meant by the mental factor of memory here. It's active memory. It's always being So it's like if I'm trying to do something important, I have to keep in mind what I'm doing. If I get distracted and start thinking about something else, then I can't really accomplish my task. So in this context, it means always remembering, um, a few important things, especially remembering vows. So if one is a monk or nun, it's important to always remember your vows. It's not that you always have to recite your vows again and again, 24 hours a day, but some part of the mind always has to be aware of them. Otherwise, they'll get broken. There's no way to keep a vow if you don't remember you have it. So even though you might not actively be thinking about it, some part of the mind is aware of it. And with that, like that with all of the training. So this is why there has to be both awareness, to be meta awareness, to be aware of what's happening in the mind, and then the mindfulness to remember what we are trying to cultivate. So one without the other is useless. If we just have mindfulness, but we don't actually know what's happening in our minds, then again, we can't apply any antidote. And if we just have awareness, but we don't remember what we're trying to do, it just doesn't, it's not helpful. This is kind of the stereotype that Lama Zopa Rinpoche often talks about. It's funny, it's called mindfulness meditation, but it's not actually using the word mindfulness. It's using the word mindfulness here more in the sense of this mental factor of meta awareness, where it's just constantly being aware of what's happening in your mind. But as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, if that's all you're doing, if that's the only practice you're cultivating, there's not actually any antidote being applied. It's not enough just to know this is happening in the mind. You have to know, okay, is that a positive or a negative mental state? And what can I do about it? If it's negative, if it's positive, how to enhance it? So then actually the three mental factors that go together are mindfulness, awareness, and then conscientiousness. So that was the last chapter. So generally those three are talked about as being the central ones for guarding one's conduct. So the ethical, the higher training of ethical discipline. So for example, if you recite the foundation of all good qualities by Tsongkhapa, he says once you've taken the vows, then you need, I think it says mindfulness, alertness, and great caution. That's in Tibetan, it's those three mental factors: mindfulness, meta-awareness, and conscientiousness. So His Holiness then in this chapter, he quoted verse 8. So he is saying that in the three worlds, there is, all of the negativity arises from the mind. In the three worlds, there's no evil greater than the mind, or no fear, no source of fear greater than the mind. It's important to recognize that all of our problems are coming from our minds. Doesn't this mean we're making everything up? It means that all of the problems we create in our lives are coming from an undisciplined mind. And if we can control our mind through practice, then we won't have all of these problems. Okay, then verse 31 of chapter 5. Talking about always remembering that one is in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So this is again the practice he was saying of conscientiousness. But just at all times being careful about what we're doing, with the sense that that we're never really alone. That there's somebody. It's not like we're being watched over by Big Brother or something, but that there's somebody aware of what actions we're doing. We've pledged to the Buddha, I'm going to behave in a certain way, and so if we go against that, then that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to whom we've made these pledges, they'll be aware of that. We can't hide that, and so that should ideally be a strengthening mental factor to help us to feel careful about our behavior. And then verse 76. So talking about when always speaking about the good qualities of others, and when they praise us, that we consider it. So the verse here merely says it's an appreciation of good qualities, but His Holiness was relating it to that when people praise us, we don't think of it as I and become inflated as a result of that. That we can see it as the qualities of others. So often this is understood. For example, if somebody praises me, I can think, for example, if somebody says, "Oh, you seem to be studying really well," I immediately will think, well, a lot of that has to do with the excellence of Sarah J and the monastery here. It's not something I created. There's not something, if anybody else was in this program for that long, they would also be studying these same things. So then to think, oh, and rejoice in my teachers and then the people here. And then for anything that is to think about it as a dependent arising, that anything is not really something that I just inherently possess my qualities, but these qualities come from the coming together of many conditions of which I really have no power. And especially if somebody says, oh, you're so beautiful. What did I do to make that happen? It has much more to do with my parents, who also didn't really choose that. It just, we'd say it has to do with the karma from the past life. But in any case, I don't think we should get too prideful about I created such good karma. So in any case, we can think about things as a dependent arising, and that diminishes. And then at the same time, we can feel good about it. If somebody praises the qualities, we don't have to immediately try to feel bad about it and think, oh, I shouldn't feel good. It's okay, I can feel good, but it's not just for me. It's praise for many different people who have come together to make this happen. So His Holiness was saying, yeah, he just came back to saying, I read this text again and again, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. And then that's when he said, as I mentioned before, he said that except for chapter 9, then all the rest of it is quite easy to understand. And it's good that people can read these things. Okay, I'm actually surprised. See, I was thinking I made a mistake, but it looks like the next verse he commented on was in chapter 8. So there was quite a big gap between when he made any comments. So in chapter 8, which is the chapter on meditation, but actually, when we think about meditation, we might think that chapter 8 is all about how to focus the mind and practice concentration, but chapter 8 is mainly about two subjects. One is about thinking about the faults of samsara and of ordinary happiness. The idea is that it's trying to encourage us to feel disillusioned with the world so that we have impetus to go into retreat. So we have to have some sort of mental stability in the sense that I'm going to stay in retreat. Otherwise, there's not much use in learning how to meditate if you can't actually stay single pointedly in one place. So the first part of the chapter is a lot about that. Then the second part of the chapter is about exchanging self and others. So it says, once I start meditating, the first step is to exchange self and others. Then at the very end of the chapter, then it's at the very last verse is, so therefore I should focus my mind. But it doesn't actually give particular instructions on how to do that. I think the idea is that perhaps that will come naturally if one has really cultivated renunciation and bodhicitta, which is the main focus of the chapter. So His Holiness, he quoted verses 95 and 96, saying, I recite these every day. So for chapter 8, 95, 96. So it's when it's the case that myself and others are equal in wishing for happiness, and there is no difference between myself and others, then why is it that I only make effort towards my own happiness? And when it's the case that myself and others are alike in not wanting suffering, then why is it that I guard myself and don't protect others? So these are just the sort of summary verses, but there's quite a lot in here, as many of you know. This Shantideva goes through all kinds of reasoned arguments that kind of what somebody might say to reject. Well, there's this reason that I would cherish myself more than others, and responding to those one by one. And His Holiness was then saying that also this relates to the view of emptiness, that it has to do with, ultimately it comes down to emptiness, that if there is no real self to protect, so this is the best way to eliminate self-cherishing is to dismantle or just to sort of deconstruct the sense of self and recognize what's underlying that. So then His Holiness, then he moved on to chapter 9. So it didn't work to share that other one. I'm going to try to share the PowerPoint because that's where I have the translation I made of chapter 9. If it doesn't work, I apologize. We'll have one more mistake and I'll come back in. But it would be nice if we could possibly access it. So let's see. Let's try it. Okay, so we're here for now. So here is, this is what I prepared this weekend, chapter 9. So verse 1, of these tributary parts, the sages taught for wisdom's sake. So it's often credited as branches. The point is that all of the other practices that we're doing, they prepare us for wisdom. So wisdom is really the ultimate point in terms of what is going to liberate us from samsara. It's going to be wisdom. The other practices are all ways of enhancing that. The more compassion we have, the more patience we have, the stronger wisdom can be. And likewise, wisdom will enhance those practices. They enhance each other. So those who wish to pacify all suffering bring wisdom forth. So His Holiness was saying we need to place all beings in the state of a Buddha. And for that reason, the realization of emptiness is important. Unfortunately, the video seemed to cut out at this point. I thought maybe it was the computer, but I listened back to it several times, and it kept blurring His Holiness' speech. So I'm not sure exactly what he said, but that was the main point. And he's saying that the wisdom of emptiness has to be combined with bodhicitta in a sort of mutually supportive way. Then verse 2, the ultimate conventional, these are the two truths we accept. So he was saying that we have, when we talk about wisdom, it's both wisdom of ultimate truth and wisdom of conventional truth. We need to cultivate both of them. The ultimate's not in mind scope. His Holiness was commenting on this quite a bit. This is a very important point because this is one of the most highly debated parts of the text among the different Tibetan schools. So a lot of people, especially before Tsongkhapa, considered that this verse is saying that emptiness is not actually an object of knowledge. Okay. So see, I'm watching to make sure people are blinking. That helps me to know that it hasn't cut out, but I saw somebody didn't blink for a minute, so I thought it would cut out. So there was, before Tsongkhapa, I mentioned yesterday, Chapa Chogi Zenge, who was the great logician, who thought that emptiness was a truly existent thing. And the idea was that his reasoning for this is that if emptiness is found by the wisdom realizing the ultimate, then it must be inherently existent, because the wisdom realizing the ultimate is searching for what is inherent existence. So if we analyze something and we try to find out how it exists, we find out it doesn't exist inherently. What we do find is emptiness. So it would seem that therefore it's that emptiness is what's left. It's found by the wisdom realizing emptiness. And therefore it is ultimately what is ultimately found, and therefore it's ultimately existent. So then after Chope Chogi Senge, actually born the year that after he died, was Ngok Loden Sherap, who was one of the great translators. A lot of the texts that we use are translated by him. And he had the exact opposite view, but for the same reason. He said that because if emptiness was found by the wisdom realizing emptiness, it would be truly existent. So therefore, emptiness is not realized by anything. There is no such thing as realizing emptiness. There is simply negating what's not emptiness. And then the mind rests in this negation without actually realizing anything. So he as a source for this, he used this term. The ultimate is not in mind scope. The ultimate cannot be realized by mind. It's not something we can directly conceive by mind. We can only conceive what it's not. So Tsongkhapa said that both of these people are making the same mistake of not understanding the emptiness of emptiness. That when we analyze something other than emptiness, so for example, if we analyze a pot, we find the emptiness of the pot. But if we analyze emptiness, we find the emptiness of emptiness. So it's not that emptiness is found by ultimate analysis, in the sense that ultimate analysis analyzing emptiness does not find emptiness, it finds the emptiness of emptiness. It's a bit of a complex point, but I guess the simple way to see it is that when we analyze one thing, we find that thing's emptiness, but we can keep going back and back. So then we focus on that particular the emptiness of any particular thing is still dependent on other things. It's not that there's some ultimate emptiness that's real that we find behind everything else. It's a contingent thing, that the emptiness of pot is a quality of pot. It's not as though there's this emptiness of pot that existed from beginningless time. It's simply that it's in the nature of the pot to not have inherent existence. But if there's no more pot, there's also no lack of inherent existence of pot. And the lack of inherent existence of pot depends on also a labeling consciousness. It's not that exists beyond our framework of understanding it. So Papa then says, when the ultimate is not in mind scope, he takes this to mean that it's not in the scope of ordinary conventional awareness, but so mind in this context is talking about conventional mind. It's not talking about wisdom analyzed the ultimate. So His Holiness said, in this case, the ultimate is the object of the equipoise of an Arya being directly perceiving emptiness, or of a Buddha. But that's not our ordinary consciousness. So it's not like the mind that we usually experience. So then His Holiness went into talking about dependent origination and emptiness, and saying that when we have ten drel, the ten jung, which is dependent origination, the ten dependence, this shows that it doesn't have independence. It's not independent of other things. Anything depends on others. And tenidaksam, so meaning it's merely labeled based on something else. So then he went into talking about how mind has, there are different kinds of mind, conventional minds. We have wrong consciousnesses and doubt, and then valid cognition, which has two kinds. Inferential cognition, which is when I know something based on a reason through conceptuality, like I infer that there's fire behind the mountain because there is smoke I can see, so I know that there's fire without seeing it directly. And then direct perception, which is, for most of us, direct perception is talking about our sense consciousness. But if somebody cultivates meditation, then they can also have direct perception with the mental consciousness, which is not something we usually experience. So when it's saying the ultimate is not in mind scope, it's not in our ordinary conceptual consciousness, is not able to see it as it really is. Although, according to Tsongkhapa, we can conceive of emptiness. That is also a major difference between Tsongkhapa and previous Tibetan scholars before him, and also many after him, is that it is possible to have an inferential understanding of emptiness. However, it's still not exactly the same as experiencing it directly. Just like you can explain to me all about Tibet, but if I've never been to Tibet, it's still going to feel very new when I get there, no matter how much I've read about it. But I can still have a very good understanding of it without going there. So in the same way, it's possible to have a very good understanding of emptiness, and actually it's necessary in order to access emptiness. And so His Holiness was saying this not in mind scope, meaning it's not in the scope of a mind that has dualistic appearance. The dualistic appearance has many levels. It's both dualistic appearance in the sense of a bifurcation of subject and object, and also dualistic appearance in the sense of things appearing to have some kind of inherent existence. So in the equipoise on emptiness, direct perception of emptiness, neither of those is there. There's no sense of I am seeing emptiness. Some people say that it's not actually, you don't actually know you've realized emptiness until afterwards, because during the realization of emptiness, there's no sense of I am realizing emptiness. It's just a complete, it says, like the mind and the object melt into one. It says like water poured into water. Then after arising from that, then there's a memory of it and realizing I just realized emptiness. But at the time, there's no dualistic experience whatsoever. So His Holiness was then saying, he says, I can't stay in that state very long, but little bit, sometimes I have some experience, he was saying. And then he went on to verse 5, was it? Yeah, so in verse 5, The worldly one sees functioning things, but hold to them. Oh, the worldly one see functioning things, but hold to them as genuine, and not as like illusions. Here, the yogis argue with the world. So he was saying that ordinary people, they see functioning things in the world. So all of the different physical things we can see that function and that function of the mind. Hold to them as genuine means that take them to be real in the way they are experienced and not illusion-like. And in this point, the yogis argue with the world. They say that actually they are not existing as they appear. They are illusions or like illusions. So His Holiness was saying that the Arya being does accept, the yogis here is talking about Aryas, ones with direct perception of emptiness, that they accept that there is such a thing as a functioning world. It's just that it is illusion-like. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist at all. It doesn't exist as it appears, is how His Holiness put it. So then His Holiness, he went on again to quote these verses that he often quotes from Engaging in the Middle Way, or Entering the Middle Way by Chantakirti. So I'm afraid to display these because that other program seemed to be causing the things to freeze here. So I won't display them. But if you have a chance, it's verse 36, chapter 6, verse 35, 36, 37 of Chantakirti's text, Entering the Middle Way. But the point is that the main point of these verses is that this is the heart of Chantakirti's position that is different from any other Madhyamaka scholar, or at least the non-Prasangika would say. So especially his opponent Bhavaviveka, that we can't search and find any conventional existence. So in Bhavaviveka's system, ultimately nothing exists. Still, we can establish how does it exist conventionally in a way that is a common appearance to all people. Otherwise, he says, if we couldn't have that, then there would be no conventions. Because I could say one thing and you could say something else, and this is true for me, that's true for you. If there's no truth conventionally, then we can't have any commonality to talk about anything. Because for me, one thing's true because I believe it, and for you, something else is true because you believe it. So this is a common problem in Buddhist philosophy: is that if you have emptiness, how does that function? And so Bhavaviveka says there has to be some degree of some kind of truth that we can conventionally establish, and also that things, when we search for them conventionally, we have to be able to identify what they are. If we can't identify them conventionally, then they don't exist at all. But Chantakirti is saying that actually, when we search for anything using analysis, philosophical analysis, we cannot pinpoint it. The only thing we find is emptiness, of the emptiness of that thing. So he says, back on this side, this is verse 36, back on this side, meaning apart from finding emptiness, then you don't find anything else. And so he says, do not use analysis to analyze conventions. So conventions just simply exist by worldly renown. And this is what Shantideva, he goes on to say in the next verse, I'll come to in a minute. Well, what does that mean, worldly renown? If everything exists by worldly renown, well, if we all agree it's one thing, but we're wrong, for example, in the 13th century, everybody agreed that the earth, the sun was revolving around the earth. Does that make it true? This is a very good question. So actually, I don't have time to go into that now. Maybe during the weekend we can discuss that point. But this is what Chantakirti is saying. Chantakirti I'm sure he would say no. I mean, I don't know if earth or sun revolving around the earth. I don't know what they thought in ancient India. But in any case, if he knew for certain, okay, the earth is revolving around the sun, if everyone thinks it doesn't, is that true? He would say no. But it's quite a subtle way of responding to it. That worldly renown does not simply mean that whatever people think is true, but it means that what negates it is still a worldly consciousness. So we now know that the earth revolves around the sun, but so it is negated by another conventional consciousness. So it doesn't mean that everything that the world accepts is true. It could be later negated by a convention. But his point is that ultimate analysis is a separate thing. We can't apply ultimate analysis to try to establish the truth of things in the world, and we can't apply, and that at the same time, we can't apply an ultimate analysis to establish the truth of things in the world, and at the same time, what ultimate analysis negates cannot negate any worldly truth. So basically, Chandrakirti would say, okay, well, we all agree that the sun revolves around the earth. Okay, well, we can say that's true for the time being, unless somebody proves it wrong. If somebody proves it wrong, then it's going to be wrong. Now we've proved it wrong. We might even say today, maybe sometime we'll find that it's actually the more subtle thing. It's not either is revolving around the other one is some more subtle answer. In some sense, this was Newtonian physics, and then when Einstein came along, it looks like actually the situation is more complicated. So Chandrakirti would say, okay, those are all of those things are based on conventionalities. It's nothing to do with what I'm trying to negate with ultimate analysis. So we can just accept as the world accepts it, and if the world finds better answers, we can agree with them. But that has nothing to do with the ultimate analysis, which doesn't change, because at any time, ultimately, we can't find anything at all that we can establish. But conventionally, we can talk about things and find better and better ways about talking about them that are closer to how they are, but they're not exactly how they are, because nothing is exactly how anything is, because when we analyze it, we can't ultimately find it. So then, the next verse, verse 6. Things seen directly, forms and such, are by renown, not validly. So this is the point, that when we see something, with our direct perception, with our sense perception, they're not actually established by valid cognition. They're established by worldly renown. Now, again, this is another verse that some Tibetans use to argue that therefore there is no conventionally established valid cognition. Valid cognition cannot establish conventional truth, which again is the position of many Tibetans before Tsongkhapa and after. Tsongkhapa is actually somewhat unique in not saying that. But Tsongkhapa is very clear that it's very important to also, that there is valid cognition that establishes conventions. It's valid, conventional valid cognition. So Tsongkhapa would interpret this not validly in this context to mean not by ultimate valid cognition, to qualify what Shantideva is saying here. But in any case, this we see is very similar to Chandrakirti. This is the one that was saying that Shantideva's position is very similar to Chandrakirti in terms of merely imputed. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes left. I definitely have to leave it at 5:30 because we have debate tonight. So, because we're going to be going over these verses detail by detail the next couple of days, I don't necessarily need to finish going over the review of His Holiness's comments on them, because as we go through them, I can also mention His Holiness said such and such thing. I could do that, but I thought maybe it's better we have a few, if people have questions, and if not, then I will come back and finish the last few things that he said. Otherwise, I'll continue the next couple of days. So does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, well, if there's no questions, then I will continue. But if you have them, please feel free to send them in the chat at any point. So I'll go back to the text here. Actually, I need to share it, right? Okay. So the next one His Holiness mentioned was verse 23. He was saying this is then the Chittamatra, the non-mind-only school, their idea of reflexive awareness or self-cognition, because this is another important point that comes up, is mind aware of itself? Are we aware of being conscious? And this is very important for the mind-only school, because their position, which is that the only thing that's truly distant is the mind, it hinges upon that we can establish that is true because we experience it. Whereas the experience of external objects is based only on the mind experiencing them. It's not something that exists apart from the mind experiencing it. And so it requires self-cognition to as a basis for that. It's like when we really come down to it, what can we establish? We can establish mind because we can experience that directly. It's actually fairly similar. If any of you know the argument of René Descartes, that I think, therefore I am. It's saying, basically his point was that the one thing that nobody can deceive me about is my own experience, that I know I exist. Now, in this case, he says I, but the Chittamacha would probably argue with him a little bit. But the main point is that we know what I'm experiencing. Nobody can deceive me about that. Oh, sorry, so there's a quote. The quote from Dharmakirti, as translated by Geshe Dorjinando, can you please go over how we make things dual? Okay. So Dakyonani Shende She, Dakyonani Shenge She, Dakshin Chale Zintanda. So I think in this quotation, he's just saying, I mean, the question of how we make things dual is quite a deep question. But I think here what he's saying is fairly straightforward, simply that if I have a sense of self, then there's naturally going to be a sense of other, because self only exists in relation to other. So once I start having a sense of me and mine and my things and my place, then there's a sense of the things that are not that, and that I either ones that I rely on to help me or ones that are going to harm me. Then it has a sense of me and other. And then from that comes attachment and aversion. So then the things that I identify as, okay, here is me, and here's this other person who is going to make me happy. So therefore I have to cling to them and not let them go, because I am me and they are them. So the only way to keep them close to me is to possess them. Or that this person is separate from me and is going to harm me. So therefore the only way to defend myself is to harm them back. So in either case, through this bifurcation of me and other, then it comes the afflictive minds that exaggerate the qualities of the object, that have the sense that the object is either excessively beautiful and desirable, or excessively ugly, or excessively something that an object of anger or hatred. I think if you happen to be able to get this verse, this text by, this text by Geshe Dorjinando, I was actually going to share it on the screen, I think I mentioned, but I couldn't find, well, actually, I did try, I think, as you saw, I tried to share, but I think it was a different translation because I couldn't find this immediately, but you should be able to find it on the internet, I think, because this book is for free distribution. Pramana Bhartika, Acharya Dhammakirti, Tibet House, Geshe Dorjinando. So verse 220. He doesn't actually offer any commentary on it, but I think there is available somewhere. There was a course that he gave, and he was talking about this. So if you're able to find the transcript of that, you can read. Verse 219, not 220, 219. Then you can look at what he has to say about that. Okay, so regarding and the no self-cognition, how is consciousness recalled? So this is the mind-only school's main argument. If there was no self-cognition, how can I remember that I had any experience at all? Talks about memory. So when I see something, I can remember what I saw, but I also remember the act of seeing. I don't just remember an external world, I remember my own experience of it. So therefore, just as I have eyes that see the things I see, there must be some part of my mind that's aware of my mind. So this is the response that Shantideva gives is quite, so we might say, curious. It's quite odd, but it makes a very good point. We have to think quite carefully about what he's saying. So he says, just like recalling poison from a rat conjoined with other experience. So this is giving an example. So I don't know if what rat poison is. I didn't poisonous rats. But the idea is, I think that if a rat bites somebody, so let's imagine I get bitten by a rat today, and there's some poison, and we might say probably the best way to think about it is probably has tetanus or something, some kind of bacteria. I experience being bitten, but I don't experience being poisoned. I don't know I'm being poisoned. But then a few months later, when I get sick, then I know that at that time that I was bitten, that I was poisoned. So I can remember being poisoned, even though I never experienced it in the first place. So recalling conjoined with other experience, meaning that from then on, when I remember being bitten, in my mind, it's imprinted that there was the poison along with that bite, even though at the time I wasn't aware of it. So this understanding of recollection of consciousness is that when I'm experiencing the external world, then I remember that in conjunction with remembering what I experienced, I remember the experience of it. So Tsongkhapa, he considers this to be correct. He considers he gives two main quotations for negating self-cognizers. This quotation here, and then from Chandrakirti in his section on in chapter 6. So I don't want to do the screen share, but I'll tell you the verse. Hold on. Yeah, so if you happen to have Chandrakirti's text, it's chapter 6, and then verse 72, and going on from there. And so mainly the point is that Chandrakirti argues that when I experience something, there isn't a bifurcated experience of subject and object. That there, because even when I say I saw, immediately it's recollected in conjunction with the experience of it. There's no way to experience something independently of experience. It's not that I'm on the one hand experiencing the object and on the other hand experiencing the object, because he says this would lead to infinite regression. Then I have to experiencing the object and experiencing the object and so forth. It's simply that the awareness and so the awareness and the object can't exist interdependently. They're dependent on each other. This is a very important point for Chandrakirti in terms of what is emptiness. And then Shantideva is maybe making the same point here. Tsongkhapa thinks he is. That it's not. It has also to do with what is mind. So the Chittamatra is saying that mind is this real thing that exists, whereas Chandrakirti and Shantideva's position is that mind only exists in relation to the object, and the object only exists in relation to the mind. I think this is probably the most important point that is being made in this chapter, because if one really understands this, it is a very strong argument against materialism, which is the dominant paradigm today in mainstream science and also in the world in general. It's the exact same problem as the Chittamatra saying that only mind exists. If somebody says that only objects exist, only the physical world exists, and the experience is illusory, it runs into the same problem of nothing can exist without experiencing it, but experience cannot exist without something that it experiences. So to say that mind is some sort of superfluous thing, becomes problematic. So I'll talk about that more this weekend. But again, I'll just trying to go through now mainly a few of the other things His Holiness said. But this verse is, as I say, is one of the main ones that Tsongkhapa he quotes from this chapter. To point out that then the question is Shantideva saying that, so if I experience the rat poison later, Is that I didn't experience the poison at the time, right? So is it saying that when I'm aware of something, I don't actually experience my mind, and I only know my mind through memory? That's a major point of debate. That's actually something we spend a lot of time debating. And there is different people who say different things about that in the Tibetan tradition also. And even Tsongkhapa and his student Chodjug, they seem to say different things. So that leaves us a lot of room for making a debate about this. Okay, so then verse 25. So the mind only, this is just in brackets to give the context. Without self-cognizer, there is no memory, so experience of objects, sight and hearing all disappear. Because if we don't remember anything, then we can't really talk about it ever existing. So they seem to be thinking that we're negating that things exist at all. This is, again, what Chandakirti was saying about ultimate analysis. It doesn't negate conventions. It negates the ultimate existence of things. So the response that Shantideva gives is, to see and hear and know are not negated in this paradigm. But here the cause of suffering, conceiving true existence, is. So it's not negating ordinary experience. And this paradigm, what it's talking about is in conventionality. In this talk, when we talk about conventions, we're not negating these things. What we're trying to negate is the cause of suffering, which is holding to them to be truly existent. Then verse 33, Holiness quoted. So this is the verse I told you I would tell you when we get to this verse, and I'll mention it again tomorrow, where it says when Shantideva recited this, actually, no, the next verse, but these two together, when he recited these verses, then he ascended into the air, because this is symbolizing the realization of emptiness. So when nothing's there, nothing's observed. Nothing's observed to be the thing that's scrutinized. Then how, without a base, can an unreal thing stay before the mind? So he's saying that if I search for the truth of something, I find anything. So if there's nothing if no real thing, then how can an unreal thing exist either? Because an unreal thing depends upon a real thing. So His Holiness was saying this is implying no, when we search for the truth of something, we can't find it. Then verse 34, when neither real nor unreal things abide before the mind, because no other aspects there, within non-observation, be at peace. This is the one where it says then he ascended into the air and disappeared. So His Holiness was saying with this context, then we can use the sevenfold analysis and the fivefold analysis. This is talking about the sevenfold analysis is Chandakirti, and the fivefold analysis is Nagarjuna. So the fivefold analysis, I only have 6 minutes left, so I cannot go through it one by one. But if you're interested, it is based on verse 1 of chapter 22 of Nagarjuna's text Root Wisdom, when it says the Tathagata the Tathagata is not the aggregates nor separate from the aggregates. It does not possess, is not dependent on the aggregates, and the aggregates do not depend on the Tathagata, the Buddha, and does not possess the aggregates. So who is the Tathagata? And His Holiness often says, just replace Tathagata in this verse with self. It might be easier for you to meditate on that. So the self is not the aggregates, is not different from the aggregates, is not dependent on the aggregates do not depend on the self, and the self does not possess the aggregates. So Chandakirti, he adds 2 more possibilities. That's why it comes to 7, in case someone has more doubts about it. So it's also that the self is not the collection of the aggregates, and the self is not the shape of the aggregates. Or I think shape might be better translated. In Tibetan, it's just neat, the shape, but we could say the configuration. So somebody could think, because the argument for this not being a collection is that, well, if for example, a chariot was the collection of the parts, if you smash the parts are still there, but we didn't say there's still a chariot. So somebody could say configuration, that it's not just the parts, they have to be arranged in a particular configuration in order to be a chariot. When the aggregates, if one's body melts into fire or whatever, then we'd say the aggregates are still there, but there's no more person. But okay, but when they exist in this particular way, and actually, I've seen that. For example, one materialist scientist who was asked to define what is self, he said that it's the particular configuration of the atoms of the body, or the atoms and molecules of the body, configured in a particular way. So that is exactly what Chandrakirti is negating in that context. And that's probably the most important one to negate, because that's probably the one that is most likely somebody could think, well, maybe that really is true. And the main argument Chandrakirti uses there is that in any case, what you're trying to find is who the self really is. You're trying to find some kind of substantial thing that we can point to and say that when I say self, that's what I mean. And so if I say that the shape of the self, the shape of the aggregates, that is actually a quality of the self. So if there's no self that is a substantial thing to begin with, then how can a quality of an unsubstantial thing itself be substantial? So if I say, what is myself really? I say, well, myself is the shape of myself. It doesn't explain anything. It just begs the question, well, what is the self that has that shape? The shape of whom? So again, Chandrakirti would say, when you in either case, you're again making the mistake of thinking that when I think self, what appears to my mind is something that actually exists in the world that I can point to. And when I can pinpoint that, I'll have identified what I'm really thinking of. Whereas actually what we're thinking of is a mental construct. There's nothing to do with anything that existed before I thought about it. It is based on things that I've experienced. I could conceive of them in a particular way and then come up with an idea. But that idea, although it could be accurate conventionally, it does not exist when I try to pinpoint it. Okay, so yeah, I'll have to leave the rest of it because we only have a couple minutes. But again, we'll go through the verses one by one over the weekend, and then yeah, as I come to points that His Holiness commented on, I'll try to keep those in mind. I was even thinking there's 167 verses in this chapter. Four sessions, it's going to be hard. So I'll do what I can, but let's see. And if we don't finish in 2 days, maybe we can think about meeting some other time in the future. Let's see what happens. But anyway, for the time being, thank you all for today. I have to go to debate now and talk about Vinaya, very different subject. But thank you. And so those of you who are interested, you can welcome to come tomorrow at 4. And very fortunately, so I mentioned the disciplinarian is very, very strict these days. But he did give me permission to miss the next 2 nights. So I can also give 2 sessions a day. So tomorrow we'll do 4 o'clock, and then again, I think it's 4 to 5:30 and 6:30 to 8, I believe. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Venerable Gache. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening or good morning, wherever you might be.
Thank you so much. Very nice to see you again. Good night.
Thank you, Venerable Gache. Good night.